Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So today I'm talking about Wayfarers of the South Tigris. Man, if we've been waiting a long time for this one. The joys of Kickstarter deliveries. The UK is always one of the last ones to get anything these days, and so whilst other people have been getting Wayfarers and playing with it, I've had to wait impatiently for the postman to bring it to my place. Okay, yes, I've played it a few times on Tabletop Simulator already, but you want the physical copy, don't you? That's what you want. But finally it's here. I've given it more plays, including the solo mode, which I'll do in a separate little video. But now I can finally give my full thoughts on it. So as a little background, yeah, I've talked a lot about Garfield games in the past, okay? I love Raiders of the North Sea, it's in my top 100. I love Architects of the West Kingdom, it's probably my favourite game they've done. It's in my top 100, obviously. I also love Viscounts of the West Kingdom, again, top 100, pretty much neck and neck with Architects. I love their games. Granted, I burned out a bit on Paladins, hence I've mentioned it on a couple of recent top 10s. I've not played Shipwrights, but frankly I don't think I hear anybody talk greatly of that one. But also Explorers I've never played. However, as a little treat, hello, I have it now. I decided to, I got sick and tired of everybody telling me to play Explorers, so it's like, fine, I had some credit, and thanks to KIENDA, I've managed to get myself a copy of Explorers of the North Sea. So at some point, maybe nearer to Christmas or in the new year, I'll be able to get this played and give some thoughts on that. But yes, I'm intrigued to play it just as much as I'm sure you are of hearing me talk about it. So we had North Sea, we had West Kingdom, so continuing around the compass, we've got South Tigris. I think that's how you pronounce it, it's not Tigris. And if we're going to go by the previous pedigree from the last series, Architects was my favourite of those three. So could this one be my favourite of this three? Well, we'll have to find out, because it's going to be a while before we see the other two. But, you know, this one I was definitely excited to get. This is definitely a much more card-based one compared to a lot of the others, because a lot of this game revolves around getting cards with tags on them. So think what we had from Ark Nova, Terraforming Mars, you know, getting the icons on the cards and using them to power other things. But essentially what you have is you have a display board with a ton of cards surrounding it. This is the journal track event, essentially, and there's a couple of bolt-ons to the end as well. But what you're doing mainly during the game is acquiring cards which are set around the edge of this board and moving your journal marker along this journal track here in order to get various bonuses, but also to trigger the end of the game, which is the first person to reach the end of the journal track. The cards come in various different guises, and these aren't all sleeved because I've only just had my new sleeves arrive today. But you've got, for example, sea cards. So you've got sea, like harbors and oceans in here, which can get you immediate bonuses. They can get you more dice placement actions. But then you've also got the land cards. So if you don't want to go to sea, you can go on land instead. A whole bunch of cards for those. And these again will give you dice placement spots, but potentially some ongoing bonuses. Like every time you collect a certain card, you get another bonus. But then of course it wouldn't be a Garfield game if you didn't have townsfolk. So in the green category you've got townsfolk. And these townsfolk do what you thought they would do. They boost actions that you already do. You slide them underneath other cards, and when you trigger the card, you trigger the townsfolk. I already love this from Architects with the Artisans expansion and that. I love it here as well. It's more townsfolk. Always gotta love those. That's the solo mode. We'll get onto those. The inspiration cards, which are a sort of mini subset of cards. These basically allow you to gain extra points for space cards if you fulfill a condition. And the space cards, well, they go above all your other cards, all your other land and sea cards. And they've got comets, stars, planets, and various endgame scoring bonuses like 1 point for every harbour, 1 point for every black tile, 1 point for every comet symbol, you know, that kind of thing. There's a lot of cards, quite a few. And what you're essentially doing is building a panorama on your board. So you start off with a board like this, and then on this side you're building the land cards, on this side you build the sea cards, and then above those cards you build the space cards, and then above the space cards you build the inspiration cards. It's a lot of cards. I'm going to be saying that word a lot in this video, but The idea being that as you build up this display of cards, you'll unlock more dice placement actions for you to do, and you'll acquire more tags, which enable you to get victory points at the end, but also give you access to other cards or more stuff to move along the journal track. Your turn is essentially pretty straightforward. You either place a die, which is dice that you roll at the start of a round, and the value's not, well, the value is important, sort of. Basically, the dice placement spots require sometimes a symbol, like a camel or a pigeon or a boat or so. And you've got a little chart at the top here which tells you what symbols appear on the various dice, but to begin with, your dice don't do a lot. What you do is that you acquire these upgrade tiles as part of your actions, and you build your little caravan like so, and so you give the dice other effects and other symbols. Sorry, the light is glaring a little bit from there, but hopefully the photos will do justice if nothing else. And so you can build this up like a little mini polyomino game. But you can also place a worker out. Place the worker around the cards, and you know there's actions on each of these cards above them. So it's like, oh, I don't want to get a card, but I do want to trigger this particular action. All right, fine. I'm going to place a worker out on, well, I need the right color, so blue in this case. You put it on the card directly. So for example, let's say, I don't know, for argument's sake, I need a townsfolk. Can I borrow a townsfolk, please? So there's a townsfolk up here. I want to do this action with a worker, and there we go, green worker. You place it on the card, meaning that if somebody else comes and takes the card, they take the workers off it. You start with a worker of blue and yellow, but they become public currency once you've put them out in play.
That just sounds like slavery with extra steps. Ooh la la, someone's gonna get laid in college.
There's a lot in this game. It's quite a mammoth, for sure. But that's a general overview. You acquire these cards, you place the workers, you make loads of different combo shenanigans with your dice, but at the main part, you are trying to journal along this track until you get to the end, at which point, trigger the end game for everybody getting the last turn, and of course, total up all the points, and the one with the most.
Of course!
Whew, yeah, that took a little bit to get through that that overview, but that is, you know, credit to the game. There's a lot going on. This is definitely one of those games that gives you a lot of options. There's a reasonable amount of rules overhead, but not as much as you might think, because a lot of the cards function very similarly. I mean, the sea cards and the land cards function almost identical, apart from just what sort of effects they might have. The townsfolk, straightforward, you shove them under a card and they boost the card that's under. Not much to teach on there, apart from how you acquire them. The space cards and the inspiration cards need a little bit more exploration, but again, you know, once you're used to one set of cards, it doesn't take long to get used to the others. The idea of collecting symbols on cards is relatively intuitive as well, and if you've played those games I mentioned like Ark Nova and Terraforming Mars, this kind of thing is kind of, you know, second nature to you. But also, and credit where it's due, Garfield games are very consistent with their iconography and their graphic design. No change here. If you're used to their other games, you will pick this up very easily. Not like super easy, but it will alleviate a lot of the burden if you're already used to the symbology they use, because there definitely is some rinse repeat here as well as the new stuff. But again, because you know how their other games play, you'll get into this one quite well. Now, that being said, I wouldn't recommend this to anybody who's not seen a Garfield game before. You really might want to jump into something a little bit simpler like Architects or Raiders, or as far as I've heard, Explorers is relatively simple. You might want to check those out first. Jumping into this one first is kind of like jumping into advanced mode. This is definitely one of the heavier titles they've put out. I don't know if it's quite as heavy and thinky as Paladins of the West Kingdom, but it ain't far off. It's getting to that point. There's definitely more thinking you have to do in this one than Architects by far, and I'd say more thinking in this one than Viscounts even, and that one wasn't exactly lightweight, shall we say. So it's not necessarily that the rules are complicated, but you have a lot of options. You have like all these cards to go after, but this is just part of the board, okay? So these are player boards. Here's the other sides to it. So you've got, you know, the side here, which is guild, which has the guilds and the other actions on it. And I forgot to mention guilds. They're basically, you put the influence on them, they allow you to do stuff, and there's points at the end. But they're pretty minor. It's a minor addition. But then you've also got the other side of the journal track here. So this is the whole track, right? 4 cards, 4 cards, 4 cards, 4 cards, 4 cards on face-up display. That's not even including like drawing from the deck in certain instances. Wow, you have a lot of choices. Oh yeah, that was just the cards. Oh, stupid of me, I forgot about the 4 worker spaces. 4, you know, the coin, this one doesn't have worker spaces, you're right there, but 4 worker spaces, 4 worker spaces, 4 worker spaces, 4 worker spaces. So you have got somewhere in the region of about 20 cards to pick from, and about 16 worker spaces, and that's not even including the dice placement actions. I mean, you can't just acquire a card of your choice. You have to use an action to get the card, but you're looking at all these cards deciding which one you might want, but then you're also looking at the tiles that you might want, of which there's a bunch of those. You're looking at all the dice actions you've got on your board and like, how do I do these?
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
The amount you've got to contend with in this game from a thinking level is pretty high. However, that's a good thing. This game really does tick a lot of boxes for me in terms of giving me all the options in the world, but not making it stupidly complicated in order to decipher each one. It's a case of, look, I know the sort of thing I'm after, this is what I'm kind of focusing on, and ideally you ought to focus in one area and not try to diversify too much, but it's just one of those games where it's like, each of the choices I have is not stupidly complicated. It's just a case of, wow, all the choices, what do I do? Which path do I go down? What's a good tactical opportunity? Because you might be thinking, well, I need to aim for these particular cards, but then you see another card come out and you're like, ooh, that looks juicy. I fancy a little bit of that. What do you think, Fizzkig?
Don't ever do that again.
But with all this thinking comes a hefty cost. The cost being the length. This box quotes 60 to 90 minutes on it.
I don't think so.
I really don't think so. That is a bow-face lie. It's a massive lie. 2 players, you can get this done in about 90 minutes. Fine. 60 to 90 minutes is doable, but 3 players in 90 minutes? That's touch and go. 4 players in 90 minutes? Physically impossible. Never have I seen or played a 4-player game of this where it went to anywhere close to 90 minutes. And I'm not even including the setup and teach. Setup takes a while because you've got all those different cards to shuffle and put out. You've got all the different, various tiles to lay out on various stacks. Then you've got all your player pieces and that. So setup's quite a bit of a chore already. There's a fair amount to teach. There's a decent amount of rules overhead in this. And then you're expected to do this in 90 minutes before? It is not going to happen. There is just way too much going on, too much happening on turns, too much thinking time. I mean, there's only so much you can plan ahead for because the card states will change quite frequently, not to mention workers will come and go and all this sort of stuff, so you can't plan 5 turns ahead like you could in certain other games. So there will be a lot of analysis paralysis that this game can generate. And certainly just the thinking time alone is going to extend this way beyond 90 minutes. 4-player games of this where you've got new players can take this to 2.5 to 3 hours. It really does go that long. Now, I'm having fun during that time, but man, that is long. That is quite long. I usually only want to play this at max 3 players now because I know the length's going to be crazy unless I trust implicitly the people that I'm playing with. Certainly, if I can play this 2-player, hello, great, I love it. Although the cards don't cycle as much in a 2-player as they would in the 4-player, but then again, you might think that 4-player is a bit too chaotic, so, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But wow, yeah, 60 to 90 minutes? No. I mean, that is 60 to 90 minutes. Bear in mind it's 1 to 4 players, right? So they are basically assuming that 60 is with 1 player, 70 is with 2, 80 is with 3, 90 is with 4. If you go relative linear progression through that time length, it's trying to tell you that it's 10 minutes a player.
That's very unlikely.
Now with the player scaling, the 2 to 3, 4 players other than the length works fairly similarly. You have a certain amount of tiles depending on player count. You always have the same amount of cards out. It's just with less players, the cards don't cycle as much because there's only 2 of you buying cards as opposed to 4. But even so, in 2 players, I've never found that the decks were that stagnant, except for maybe the inspiration and the space cards. Those ones, on this side of the board, do tend to stagnate a bit. But the land cards, the townsfolk, and the sea cards, they tend to cycle relatively quickly because they're the ones that are getting bought more often than all the others. So even a 2-player, it's not too bad. But yes, if you want the cards to cycle more, you're going to need more players. Or you could just house rule some effect that maybe after so many rounds or every time somebody rests, the cards cycle a little bit. I mean, it's not in the rule book, but you could easily house rule something like that in there. But honestly, yeah, the game scales fairly well, except for the length part as mentioned earlier. The rulebook itself, as I mentioned, there's a fair bit of overhead, but I actually found this rulebook to be better than some of the ones in the past. The iconography is all on the back of the book, so, you know, as much as I would have liked a reference aid for each player, it's nice that I've only got to turn to the back of the book to find all the important iconography, and for the most part, the iconography, yes, there's a lot, but it's pretty intuitive. I mean, you know, what different cards are what? Well, look at the colour. I mean, if you're colourblind, that's going to cause a bit of a problem, but, you know, otherwise, you've got the different upgrade tiles. They've got pictures on it, which is kind of weird, actually. The upgrade tiles have got pictures on to differentiate for colourblindness, but the cards don't. It's kind of odd, but I digress. And then everything else is mainly just the different tags, which, again, you will get used to. I didn't have a problem understanding the iconography in this, but then I have played a lot of Garfield game stuff before. But even the rules in here, I found to be relatively easy to follow. I didn't really have many, if any, FAQ moments where I'm like, I have no idea how that works. Let me just have a look up here. You know, there may be one or two edge cases like there have been in the past where a particular scenario is a little bit harder to find than you would like. But as I read through the book, I managed to understand the rules for this reasonably well, although it does teach you the game in slightly a weird angle here, because it basically spends ages going through all the different things like journaling and influence and the water and land and space cards and inspiration cards and how you acquire cards and townsfolk and upgrade tiles, and you're halfway through the book before you get to player turns. Turn it around, please. Yeah, if I'm teaching this game, you teach people player turns first, you know, like placing a die and placing a worker, you know, or resting. You do those first, then you go to the concepts and the various things like the types of cards and that. It sort of teaches you a little bit back to front, but honestly, if you just skip ahead to player turns and then come back a bit, you'll be fine. But honestly, yeah, I didn't have many problems at all with the rulebook. You do have to put up with a little bit of a luck aspect with this game as well, though. In the other games, there have been occasional times where you draw crew that you don't want for your ship, or, you know, the buildings you draw aren't necessarily the ones you want, etc. So there's always been a little bit of a luck factor in the Garfield game series. Here, there's a bit more, because you could be hunting for specific tags or specific things that you want on the cards, and they just don't turn up. You have a couple of ways in order to look through the top 3 cards and choose one, but I've had times where I've tried to find a library symbol, and I've looked 3 times in the top 3 cards of the deck and never found one. It can just, like, fizzle out for you, and that's pretty punishing, because at some point you have to decide to skip it and go elsewhere, but you might not be able to, because that might be the last thing you need to journal across to the next section, and if you can't find a symbol, it kind of screws you up a bit. And in a 2.5 to 3 hour version of the game, that's annoyingly punishing. But, you know, on top of that though, you've also got the luck of what inspiration cards could come out and when. You know, I might have been gathering a ton of harbour cards. Great, I've got a bunch of harbour cards, I'm saving up those tags for points. And then I grab an inspiration card, the last one I can fit, and it's like, oh, I've got to work a little bit for it, but it's doable, we'll go for it. And then the one that comes out afterwards requires 5 of the tags that I've already got 5 for. And I can't replace the card. Oh great. So again, luck of the draw influences a little bit there. And then of course, dice. Yes, you have some dice mitigation. Yes, you can grab upgrade tiles that let you add 1 to the die roll. The yellow guild allows you to manipulate die values, so there is some mitigation, a decent amount of it. But you could still roll 3 6s, well, never in my case, but you could still roll 3 6s when you really wanted a bunch of low numbers and the dice don't wrap. Maybe the house rule should be that they do wrap, I don't know, but you could roll dice, like 5 dice you could end up with by the end of the game, and you could still just not roll the numbers that you want. That's another thing that can hose you at times. You're gonna have to get used to this with this game. Certainly more than I'd say a couple of the other games in the past. There is definitely a bit of a luck factor with all the different decks of cards and the fact that you're rolling dice. If that's gonna put you off, you might want to hold back, maybe try before you buy in a sense. For me, it's there, and in a smaller player count I don't mind so much because I'm just enjoying all the smorgasbord of options that I've got. But it has affected me at times where the luck has just punched me out of the game when I didn't want it to, and that is a little irritation. I wish there was maybe just a bit less of it. Wayfarers for me is another smash hit, frankly. I love the gameplay options in this. I love the card play. I love the different, like, paths to victory I can take. Focus on a card, diversify a little bit, which type of card, get more townsfolk, get the space, get the inspiration, grab a bunch of upgrade tiles, or maybe leave them be, focus on the workers, and go journal journal as fast as I can, journal a bit slower. There's a lot of great things I love about the gameplay in this. I like the fact that it wasn't too difficult to learn despite the overhead of rules. Although, granted, I might be slightly biased on that because I've played a lot of Garfield Games stuff before. I say, if you're brand new to Garfield Games in this sort of series, don't start with this one. Start with a different one, like maybe Raiders in the North Sea. But if you're familiar with the games, you're going to pick this up pretty well. You've got a little bit of variety with the journal board, but you've got so much variety with the cards. You've actually got an insert to speak of, even if it's not perfect, it's still damn sight better than it used to be. And you've got a lot of options with the cards. I mean, if you're going to expand this, just give me more cards. That's all I care about. I don't think it needs any more mechanics on top. But the negatives are big negatives in some respects. 4-player games of this are going to take a while. The setup is quite long. And certainly you're going to have to accept the fact that there is an element of luck with the card draw and the fact that you're rolling dice. If this is a problem for you, then you might want to stay away. For me, it is a problem, but it's only enough to knock it down a point. It's not enough to knock it down a full point. And I really enjoyed this at 2. I really enjoyed this at 3. I still enjoy my time at 4. I still think it's too long at 4 at times. But I'm still enjoying myself. It's not like I'm sat there like wishing the game would hurry up and end. I wish somebody would hurry up and take their turn and get back round to me, but I'm still thinking about all my options and enjoying what I'm doing. So that is a caveat, it is a flaw, but it's not enough to knock the game too much. Where do I rank this with the other Garfield games? I don't think it's anywhere near quite as close as Architects of the West Kingdom. I think that one just hits and ticks every box. Viscounts, I think I prefer Viscounts to this one for the rondel and the card mechanic. Do I prefer this to Raiders though? I would probably say I do prefer this to Raiders of the North Sea. So it's definitely fitting maybe as my 3rd favourite of the Garfield Games series at the moment. Maybe it can fight for 2nd place. I don't think it's ever going to be my favourite, but hey, you know, these are 4 games that I put in my top 100, so if whether you're 1st, 2nd, 3rd or 4th, you should be proud. I think overall I'm giving Wayfarers of the South Tigris a 9 out of 10. It is an excellent game. Can't quite meet 10 out of 10 though for those flaws that I've mentioned, and certainly for some of you, some of the flaws might actually be more of a burden, so you do need to bear in mind the length, the overhead of rules, and also the potential luck factor that's in the game. But for me, you know, they are niggles and it does drop it down a point, but it's not enough of a problem to drop it down past the distinction mark. I think this is still just another great fun game from them. I think it's just very enjoyable, very cool for someone like me that likes a kind of semi-strategy, have a tactical feel for a Euro game with a smorgasbord of options to pick from. It's the type of Euro that works for me. Definitely heavier than the usual fare, definitely more thinky, and I would say out of the 4 that I've got, yeah, this is definitely the thinkiest out of those 4 that I mentioned, of Raiders, Architects, Viscounts, and this one. This is definitely the thinkiest. Probably maybe not as much as Paladins, but it's not far off, to be honest. It's just a really solid game. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, remember, please thumb up the video here and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when you see it. It'd be great if this could appear in hot reviews one day. Probably will never happen, but hey, I can dream. But also I want to hear your comments down below. Rank the 6 Garfield games of the series, the North series and the West Kingdom series, and this one. In fact, that's 7 games, not 6 even. You know, what am I about to get in Explorers? Do I have something to look forward to? Am I missing out on shipwrights, or was that really the sort of black sheep of the family in a sense? And of course, stop telling me how wrong I am about Paladins, okay? Paladins is my weak link in the last trilogy. Deal with it, okay? I still respect it. Alright, I don't hate the game, I just don't like it as much as Architects and Viscounts, okay? Calm down. Man, the amount of flack I was getting for that on the last couple of live streams. But, that being said, I want to hear your comments down below about this game, about the other Garfield games. You're looking forward to Scholars? Let me know your thoughts. So until next time, you can check out more content on the channel, including the recent Beyond the Base Game videos I've done for Meadow Downstream and Frantic Fiends for Caverna. One of them is a solid expansion, the other one, not so much. Have a guess which way around they go. So until next time, remember as always, regardless of which way you're sailing, north, south, east or west, it's still only a game. Bye for now.
That just sounds like slavery with extra steps.